Sharing is Caring by Flames Dance. Read by My Lost and Found. Summary. He had a plan at the other warehouse for how to escape once they got bored with beating him. He's weaker now, feeling a little fuzzy at the edges. But escaping warehouses is basically what Robin does, and he can manage this. He's handcuffed and gagged, but that won't pose much of an obstacle. So it's not a completely terrible night, until they shove Tim through the door and he sees Hood, standing there, clearly waiting for someone. Waiting for Tim. This fic is about 5,700 words and one chapter. It is rated not rated, and creator chose not to use archive warnings. Though I recommend you take a look at the tags in the description if you're sensitive to anything, because this is a more intense fic. And remember, this is tagged hurt/comfort. As always, link to the fic is in the description, and on with the story. There have been better nights, Tim thinks, as the traffickers drag him out of the van and into yet another warehouse. It would have been smarter to go after them when Bruce wasn't off-planet, and Dick hadn't gone dark for a mission, and even Alfred was back home for his annual sabbatical in England. But he wanted to prove himself a little. He had a plan at the other warehouse for how to escape once they got bored with beating him. He's weaker now, feeling a little fuzzy at the edges, but escaping warehouses is basically what Robin does. He can manage this. He's handcuffed and gagged, but that won't pose much of an obstacle. So, it's not a completely terrible night until they shove him through the door and he sees Hood, standing there, clearly waiting for someone, waiting for Tim. He freezes, heart pounding in his ears. He hasn't, not since the tower, not since... You thought you were good enough to wear my colors, replacement. The gun prods him in the back, and he stumbles forward automatically, eyes fixed on Hood.
What is this?
Hood's voice sends a shiver through him, the mechanized voice painfully familiar. Phantom pain shoots through his arm, and Tim moves to rub it, movement arrested by the cuffs. Right, he's handcuffed, at gunpoint, in front of Hood. His arm has been healed for months, but that's probably about to change. We're tired of the chase, Hood, and we thought we'd cut you a deal. Everyone knows the bats have been giving you problems, so we got you a little gift, an incentive to leave us to do our business. The insinuation in the trafficker's voice is painfully obvious. Tim wants to scoff at the idea that Hood would take any gift from traffickers, let alone a person. He expects Hood to shoot the men for daring to think he would ever stoop so low. Hood has never been a rapist, never tolerated traffickers. Ever. There's a pause, stretching into a moment, where Tim mentally wills Hood to shoot them. Instead, Hood reaches up and takes off his helmet. Now, that's an interesting idea, he says, and Tim's blood turns to ice. No, Hood doesn't. Hood wouldn't. His brain retreats into logic. What do they know about Hood? Hood doesn't hurt the innocent. Hood protects kids. Hood hates rapists. Tim is a kid. Robin may have committed crimes, may not be innocent, but he's not a villain. And if Hood would attack him, an innocent kid, why wouldn't he? Tim swallows around the gag, mouth suddenly dry, and Hood paces around him consideringly. Tim instinctively tries to turn to keep Hood in his sight, and gets jabbed with a gun for his troubles. He subsides, skin crawling at the thought of Hood at his back, but left with no other options. He could slip the handcuffs and take out the traffickers, but he's fought Hood once already, without the haze of pain and exhaustion weighing on him, and he won't ever forget how it went. "What do you think, Hood?" one of the traffickers asks, smugly confident. "Is he enough?" Hood stops in front of Tim, and Tim stares into the whites of his domino. "Don't do this." "Did anyone touch him?" Hood inquires, his gaze raking Tim from head to toe. "Oh, we strung him up a little, beat him a bit, but I wouldn't let the guys have him, you know? Wanted to keep him fresh for you." Tim shudders, and one of the men laughs. "Doesn't look like he appreciates it, though." Hood says. "I suppose he wouldn't." There's a threat, a promise in that voice, and Tim shudders again. He's running through all his options, but none of them look good. He just can't. He can't win, not against Hood. And he can take pain. The tower proved that, if nothing else. But he's not sure he can. Would Hood really... "Uncuff him," Hood says, and one of the men objects. "He's not exactly docile, Hood. Not like our usual fare." With fear flooding him, Tim isn't sure he agrees. "Yeah," the other man says. "If you're not going to take our gift seriously." He trails off meaningfully. It makes sense that they wouldn't just trust that Hood would take an offering of a kid. But they don't know the history that Tim has with Hood. They don't know that Hood hates Tim and wants to see him suffer any way he can. And they just gave Hood a new way to hurt Tim. Hood merely shrugs, saying, "You would know best." He steps forward and roughly rips the gag from Tim's mouth, adding, "But it's always better when you can hear them, don't you think?" Tim is not sure what the best play is here. Not sure if saying anything is going to help. He works his jaw a little, loosening it from the gag, keeping his eyes on Hood. Maybe the best choice is to slip the cuffs and pick a fight and get his ass kicked, which would be better than... Hood turns his back on Tim, but Tim is still frozen with indecision. There are chains around a table, and Hood pulls one free and sprawls it in. He crooks a finger at Tim, meaning clear, and Tim swallows. It doesn't seem like the right moment to make a stand, so he shakily walks forward until he's right in front of Hood. Hood spreads his legs ostensibly wide and says, "Kneel." Tim's brain whites out for a moment, hands twisting uselessly in the cuffs, and he says, "But, Hood, you..." He's horrified to hear his voice shaking. "Robin," Hood says, and his voice is almost kind, like he's helping Tim somehow. "If you're good for me, if you please me, I'll keep you for myself. I can even be gentle on occasion. Tim can't process what he's hearing, what Hood is saying, what Hood is implying. The men are snickering behind him. And then Hood's voice hardens. But if you want to play hard to get, I can make sure everyone gets a turn. Everyone? Tim stops breathing. Raising his voice, Hood calls out to the men. Invite everyone here. When you break in a bitch, it's better to have an audience. We can celebrate our agreement. And if he gives me trouble, I'm willing to share. Tim's shaking now, heart pounding. But when Hood says, kneel, Robin, he doesn't have another choice. Tim drops to his knees. He can't keep looking at Hood, looking up at him from between his legs. Not when Hood is planning to. When he's planning in front of people. Tears prick at Tim's eyes, and he drops his gaze to the floor. Hood buries a hand in Tim's hair, and he stiffens, expecting to be dragged forward and forced to. But Hood's hand is gentle, almost a caress, and Tim shudders again as Hood quietly says, I knew you would play along with me. His voice is full of meaning, but Tim isn't playing. He feels a tear running down his face, but if he doesn't lift his head, no one will know. Hood and the men are talking, laughing about something, Hood's hand still buried in his hair. Suddenly, Hood yanks on his hair, forcing Tim to look at him. The rest of the men are taking their time, and these gentlemen are wondering if I'm truly appreciating their gift. So I thought you could provide a little entertainment. Tim wants to object, to protest, find a way to appeal to Hood and get out of this. But he knows if he opens his mouth, he's going to start begging. Some part of him knows he's going to beg at some point, but it doesn't have to be now. And if he isn't any trouble, his mind whispers, it will just be Hood and not everyone. Tim remembers the warehouse full of traffickers, imagines them all taking a turn, and knows he can't push Hood. Not now. He looks mutely up at Hood, who smiles sharply down at him, toying with a knife. Get up. Tim does. Spin. Tim does, carefully not thinking about why they're all looking at him. Hood beckons him forward, and Tim takes one halting step, and then another, until he's right in front of Hood. Hood lifts the knife, and Tim stops breathing. Surely he's not. He said he would wait. You said he was a gift, yes? The knife pauses a breath from Tim, and one of the traffickers says, just for you, Hood. Good, Hood says, slashing the knife down through Tim's armor. I love unwrapping presents. One part of Tim's brain quietly catalogs a knife that can cut his suit as league. Another piece of evidence Hood was put in the pit. But the rest of him is slowly going numb as Hood slices through his armor again and again. Hood is careful not to drop blood, and Tim holds himself impossibly still, trying to tune out what the traffickers are saying. He can still hear their laugh, their excited tones, but he focuses on not moving, He can feel the chill air seeping through all the openings, but he can't let himself shiver. Pieces of his armor littered the ground in front of him. When Hood turns and says, "Give me the key to the cuffs. I'm not doing all the work," Tim comes back to the present with painful clarity. There's no hesitation this time as they give Hood the key. Tim numbly turns around so Hood can unlock the cuffs, and Hood orders, "Finish what I started." Tim swallows, frozen for a moment. Hood raises an eyebrow at his hesitation, and Tim lifts a shaking hand, unclasping his cape, and lets it fall. He pulls off his gloves next. He knew if Hood was going to, he'd have to at some point. But now, while they're watching, they're watching him strip as entertainment. He almost wishes Hood had just sliced him open instead. If he closes his eyes, he can pretend he's somewhere else. He's back at the cave, and he can hear Dick and Bruce laughing, and he's going to go upstairs and get cocoa from Alfred. He's safe. One of the men says, "What, is he shy?" And the illusion shatters. "Pick up the pace, Robin," Hood says, and Tim tries, but it's hard with hands shaking this badly. He slides off his boots, wishing he were anywhere else. He had imagined Hood was going to finish slicing his clothes with the knife, rip them off him. Imagined he wasn't going to have to do anything. He wasn't going to have to do it himself like he wanted. He reaches a shaking hand to his zipper. The armor absorbed a lot of the blows at the warehouse, but it's in tatters now, and the next time someone hits him, he'll have no defense. And Hood said he could be gentle, but Tim doesn't see why he would bother. Hood enjoyed his screams at the tower. Standing in his ragged bodysuit, he can't help but glance at Hood. Isn't this enough? The other traffickers aren't even here yet, and Hood wanted an audience, and Tim swallows, suddenly nauseous, desperate for a reprieve. Hood just looks at him, waiting, and Tim peels himself out of the bodysuit. It's a lot easier when it's no longer skin tight, when half of it is shredded. The air is cold, and he shivers as nearly all of his skin is exposed to the warehouse. He stands there, trembling in his boxers, and tries to ignore the appreciative comments of the traffickers. Hood is silent, studying Tim, and Tim looks down at the warehouse floor. Taking a deep breath, he slides his thumb into the waistband of his boxers, and Hood says, "Wait." A surge of hope flows through him, and he looks up. Maybe Hood has realized what he's about to do. Maybe he's changed his mind. Maybe he won't. "Let's save the best part for when everyone is here." Tim drops his gaze, tears prickling at his eyes again. "How far out are they? I'm not sure I can wait much longer." Hood's amused voice coils around Tim, deep with menace. The men laugh, and one says, "I don't blame you. They should be nearly here." "Well, then I'll need to get into place." Hood looks back to Tim. "Kneel." And Tim hesitates. This isn't the place to fight back. He threw aside all his weapons and protections. He already knows what's happening, but he can't. He can't. He has to try. Please, Hood, he hears himself say, softly. Please don't do this. The warehouse falls silent. You're not. You kill rapists. You don't. Tim swallows, shaking too hard to speak for a moment, and feels the tears spill down his cheeks. Please don't do this. There's a pause, and Tim clings to his very last hope. Hood couldn't. He doesn't. Sweetheart, Hood says kindly. With a body like that, anyone would make an exception. Tim flinches and closes his eyes, but Hood is relentless. Now, kneel. And he can't. He can't. He wants to. It's a good thing your men are almost here. Looks like everyone is going to have fun tonight. Tim feels the blood drain out of his face, and he mindlessly takes a step forward and falls to his knees again, between Hood's spread legs. Please, Hood, he whispers, almost choking on the words, staring at the floor. Please don't share me. The door to the warehouse bangs open, and raucous laughter fills the air. Hood buries his hand in Tim's hair, pulling painfully tight, and Tim holds himself perfectly still, desperate to be pleasing enough, good enough for Hood that he doesn't want to share. When Hood leans down, Tim dares to whisper, please, again, but it feels hopeless. And then Hood hisses, just stay down, sounding oddly intense, shoving Tim down, and panic rises up, but he's not touching Hood. He's under the chair, floor biting cold on his bare skin, and before he can make sense of what just happened, he hears the gunshots start. Guess he's not sharing me after all. Jason stalks back to the one upright chair and the slight form slumped underneath it. He half hoped that it would be gone, that Tim would take advantage of the chaos to escape. But he hasn't moved. He's half curled under the chair, on his side, and he's shivering. Probably because he's almost naked on a cold stone floor. A voice hisses in his mind. Jason swallows as he looks at the scraps of the suit. It worked as a stalling tactic, mocking laughter ringing in Jason's ears as he watched Tim hold himself like a statue under the threat of the knife. Tears dripping past the corners of the mask. There's no way Tim will be able to wear that properly. The cape, though. The cape will work. Jason shrugs out of his own jacket and drags the chair off the kid, exhaling when there's no trace of blood. The gunfire missed him. Good. Jason drops the jacket on top of the shivering frame, and the cape too, before gathering the other bits of the Robin uniform. The kid hasn't moved. Jason can feel the cold sinking through his skin, sinking into his bones. He needs to call the bats. Someone to pick up the kid. He was clearly beaten, and Jason doesn't think he can get home by himself. The only problem is, Jason has no idea where the panic button is. The kid redesigned the whole goddamn suit, and Jason can't find it in any of the likely places. And the kid still hasn't gotten up. Robin, Jason calls out softly. Jason tried. He tried to warn the kid it was an act, thanked him for playing along, but he doesn't think it worked because the kid's terror was palpable, and Jason doubts he's that good of an actor. Jason needed to find the operation. This particular gang has been a thorn in his side, and they keep getting away. And here was a chance to get them all in one place. And the kid is Robin. He would understand. The kid, shivering against the floor, covered in a jacket and a cape, but staring blankly into middle distance. Jason's throat closes up, and he can't swallow. Robin. He tries again, snapping his fingers in front of Tim's face. Nothing. He even dares to jostle his shoulder. Kid, I need you to call the bats. Nada. No one's home. Jason sinks back on his haunches and fights the urge to bury his face in his hands. No more victims. He had seethed gleefully while he received the invite from the traffickers. He was going to end them once and for all. No more victims. Well, that was a lie. Robin, Jason whispers. We can't stay here. I have a safe house nearby. No response. I'm going to pick you up. Okay? Nothing. But they can't stay here. Someone will be by to investigate the gunshots, and Jason doesn't know how to reach the bats. He takes Robin's gear with him. He can't leave any evidence, and one of the things has to be a tracker. And surely Batman will find him soon. Surely the kid can't have been missing for that long. He almost wishes the kid would fight when he picks him up, careful to keep the cape covering him. Almost wishes he'd get a punch to the face. But the kid does nothing, says nothing, just breathes in and out, raspy and eerily level, as water drips down his cheeks. Jason wants to rage. He wants to scream. He wants to grab the kid by the shoulders and shake him. I had to do something. They were getting suspicious. I warned you to play along. And shout until he gets it through the kid's skull that Red Hood isn't a rapist, that for all his disagreements with the little shit that stole his suit, he would never yell at a dissociating kid. I'm sure that'll help. A snide voice whispers, and Jason sighs, unhooking his grapple gun and heading out. He gets the kid dressed in a shirt and sweatpants that are far too big for him, and wrapped up in a proper blanket. He doesn't know how long Batman is going to take to show up, so he starts warming a pot of milk. Heat and sugar to help with shock. Jason needs something to do with his hands, something that will erase the memory of the knife, the leer he had to force on his face, blanking out the kid and focusing exclusively on how badly he wanted to murder everyone watching. He wishes he could have taken it slow, wishes he could have gouged out their eyes first, and then cut out their tongues that made filthy suggestions while Jason tried to hold onto his stomach in feigned agreement, and finally make sure the fuckers couldn't carry out any portion of the threats they voiced before putting a bullet through their skull. He watches the milk boil, rising higher and higher, and wonders if he can just let it spill out. Cleaning the stove would give him something to do. Something that isn't reliving that scene all over again, from the moment he ordered the kid to kneel, to the point where he threatened to share him with an entire warehouse of traffickers. But he can't. Tim is dissociating and in shock, and Jason needs to be present until someone comes to pick him up, until he can scrub at all the phantom blood under his fingers and force himself to consider all the possible options he should have taken when it became clear that the kid didn't catch his hint. He turns off the milk, stirs the chocolate in, pours it in 2 mugs, even though his stomach feels like it's about to attempt an escape. Tim is right where he left him, fuzzy dark green blanket and all. Jason curls the kid's fingers around the mug, and the warmth seems to slightly wake him up. Jason can tell, because Tim immediately goes rigid. Jason backs up, sinking into the armchair opposite so he isn't looming. Maybe it would be better to wait in his room. At least the kid seems awake enough to answer questions. "Where's your panic button?" Jason motions to the pile of gear on the coffee table. Tim blinks and reaches out to a scrap that belonged to the sleeve. He offers the scrap to Jason instead of pressing the button. Jason does it for him, and then flings it back onto the pile. Tim watches it, fresh tears welling up. "They'll be here soon," Jason says uncomfortably. The kid hasn't drunk a sip of cocoa. Does he think Jason drugged it? "No," Tim says, his voice hollow. "They won't." What is the kid talking about? "Of course they will," Jason says slowly. He can't imagine Bruce taking any longer than 20 minutes to show up, no matter where he is. Batman's off-planet. A's on a sabbatical. Nightwing's in deep cover. No one's coming. Jason's first thought is shit. His second thought is, I can't deal with this. His third thought is, why does he sound so resigned? "Tim," Jason says, abruptly cold. "Tim, look at me." Blue eyes drag up to meet his gaze. "I'm not going to hurt you," Jason says, slow and careful. "I'm not going to touch you." He expects, well, he doesn't know what he expects, but it isn't for the kid to shoot up off the couch, trembling, eyes wide. "No," Tim chokes out. "No, please, please, don't share me, please." Jason can't move. Jason can't speak. Jason can't do anything but sit there, frozen, as Tim rounds the coffee table and drops to his knees. "Please, I can be good." Tim stutters through sobs. Please, rather you than..." "Stop," Jason manages to force out through bloodless lips. "I can be good, please." "Stop!" The begging mercifully cuts out. Jason stares at his knees, at fingers trembling, and he can't. He can hear echoes of desperate pleas in his ears. He remembers what gravel felt like against bare knees. He pulls his legs up onto the chair and buries his head into his knees. Only the soft, choked sobs tell him that he's not alone. "Get up," Jason says to the soft fabric of his sweatpants. He hears rustling movements. "Go sit on the couch." He waits until he hears the squeak of the couch springs. "Wrap yourself in the blanket." He can't hear it, but he assumes Tim has done it. "Drink your cocoa." The mug clinks against the coffee table several times before Tim picks it up. Jason tries not to imagine how badly the kid's fingers must be shaking.
None of that was real, Tim,
Jason says into his knees, unable to look up.
None of it. I was never gonna share you or touch you myself.
Jason remembers how it felt to rip the gag out of his mouth, to bury his hand in Tim's hair, trying to be reassuring. But if he just saw it as a threat...
I needed you back on your knees so I could shoot those assholes.
Jason feels absolutely empty.
I was trying.
His voice breaks.
I was trying to keep you safe.
For all the good it did.
You know what the Red Hood does, Tim.
And now Jason is pleading, but he still can't lift his head.
You know I kill rapists. You know I protect kids. I'd never rape a kid.
A clink, as Tim probably sets the mug back down.
You'd never hurt a kid,
Tim says, but his voice is eerily flat.
You don't rape.
Jason feels a curl of unease snake through his stomach.
But you say I'm not a kid, and you hurt me. You broke my arm, and shot me, and stabbed me, and threw me down the stairs.
Jason's stomach turns over at the emotionless recital of an evening he can barely recall. He was so deep in the pit.
So why wouldn't I be the exception here?
Fuck! Jason pushes his head more firmly into his knees, wishing fiercely Bruce would show up, even if it meant a lecture, even if it meant being thrown in fucking Arkham. He can't.
I'm the exception, right?
Tim's voice is getting stronger, and Jason would cheer to hear it, but he's frozen, pinned by guilt and shame and grief.
I'm not worth considering as a person, let alone a kid. You hate me, and you take it out on me, and you don't have to think about it because I don't count.
Jason flinches back as Tim starts yelling, but he can't look up, hot tears forming in his eyes. He deserves to be yelled at. Tim isn't even wrong. It's just that Jason has changed. But changing doesn't mean he didn't do it. And because he did hurt the kid, Tim couldn't believe he wasn't about to be gang raped in a fucking warehouse. And Jason should have done something to make sure he knew he was safe. Maybe just shot the delivery men after they summoned the rest. But Jason tried using their phones once to summon more after he killed one of them, and no one showed up. So there must be a code, and he wasn't sure if there was more than one code. And they were out every damn night, snatching kids, men and women off the streets, and... Oh, sure, Jason can find the people. Twice a week, he's finding them and turning them over to the police and making sure WE is providing the care because the traffickers like to sample their merchandise and they're brazen enough to be grabbing every night so they don't care if there's any collateral damage. So Jason is never in time for everyone, and he just... Of course I'd believe you would rape me in front of a room of traffickers! Tim's voice is venomous, and Jason can hear him stand. It's absolutely something you would do to me, and sharing me? Tim is spitting out his words, more furious than Jason has ever heard. Not that he's bothered to get to know the kid. So mostly he's heard him screaming and begging and crying. Would just be another way for you to hurt me and enjoy it. Jason really needs to say something, but his throat is closed off and the tears won't stop flowing. And Tim is right. He's absolutely right. Jason was an idiot to think Tim would think well of him, ever, or trust him to do the right thing. Look at me! Tim is standing above Jason, shouting down at him. And Jason hates that he deserves it. Hate that the pit twisted him into someone that hurts people, hurt a kid, and didn't even look back. Just look at me! Jason owes him that much. Jason owes him so much more. He shakily lifts his head and looks up at Tim through blurry vision, tears starting to run down his cheeks now that his sweatpants aren't soaking them up. He swipes the back of his hand across his eyes, trying to clear his vision so he can see Tim, but it doesn't help. I'm sorry, Jason says hoarsely. You're right, and I'm sorry. Jason is crying. Stop it, Tim says, voice unsteady with what he wants to be fury, but feels like something else. Stop it! You don't mean it. You can't mean it. So just stop. Maybe Jason never meant to rape him. Tim can believe that. But he can't. Jason had to have enjoyed his terror, all the more knowing it was empty fear. He cut his armor off Tim. He made Tim almost get naked while they watched. Jason rubs at his face again. I didn't mean to. I haven't. Those assholes kept scattering and going to ground and grabbing more and... He cuts off abruptly before continuing, his voice low. I tried to tell you to play along so you'd know it was a trick, but you didn't. I should have found another way. I should never have attacked you just for... I'm sorry. Jason stares down at his lap, and Tim takes a step backwards. I knew you would play along with me. Echoes in his ears. He missed it. Jason warned him, tried to, and Tim missed it. Like an idiot. He looks around. Jason brought him back to his safe house, wrapped him in a blanket, made him cocoa, and pushed his panic button. He didn't have to do any of this. He could have dumped Tim out on the streets. The fury leaves Tim as suddenly as it came. He looks back at Jason, and Jason suddenly looks young. He's huddled in the chair, tears still dripping down his cheeks, and Tim hates him, usually fears him, but Jason's not even legally old enough to drink, and he's been as much a victim as Tim has. More, probably, with his past. Tim was terrified in that warehouse, and he's not sure he could have played the role that Jason did. He's not sure he could have stomached pretending, even if his victim was in on it. And Jason had to realize Tim wasn't. And if Jason didn't enjoy it. Tim wordlessly circles back to the couch, grabs the fuzzy blanket, and awkwardly drapes it over Jason's knees. Jason jerks back into the chair, looking up at Tim with obvious surprise. Tim grabs the untouched cocoa mug and holds it out. You should drink too, he says, when Jason doesn't take it. If you weren't, it must have been hard to pretend. A pause. But I'm glad you got them, Tim offers, because killing doesn't bother him as much as Bruce, although he can't kill himself. and because he hopes it brought some measure of peace to Jason. Tim should be angry, he knows, or terrified, but he's just so tired, and Jason is no threat to him. Jason takes the mug, and then suddenly sits up. "Fuck, Tim," he says, wiping his face on his sleeve. "I'm supposed to be taking care of you." "Maybe we can take care of each other," Tim offers, surprising himself, "since there's no one else." "You were disassociating not even 5 minutes ago," Jason argues. "You woke up in the Lazarus pit and your murderer is still alive," Tim counters, and winces when Jason flinches back. But Jason rallies and says, "But I hurt you tonight and—" "You scared me," Tim interrupts. "Terrified me, actually. But you didn't ever hurt me, and they certainly would have hurt me more before I escaped." "But at the tower," Jason trails off, and Tim is silent for a moment, trapped in memories. Would you do it again? It's a ridiculous question, having been dressed in Jason's soft, oversized clothes, and having been given hot chocolate, second to only Alfred's, but it needs to be asked. "No," Jason says, almost inaudible. "I don't even remember much of it. It was me, but the pit." A pause. "No, I wouldn't do it again." Silence stretches, and Jason takes a sip of his cocoa. Tim tries to think what to do now, how to salvage this. Unbidden, his mind says, what would Dick do? Dick would grab snacks and blankets and put on a movie and stay with them, as long as they needed. He wouldn't leave them to face the nightmares alone. And if Dick is gone, it's just them, keeping the nightmares away from each other. Red Hood might feature in most of Tim's nightmares, but not. Tim looks down at Jason, who is tucking the blanket more firmly around his knees. Not Jason. Jason stares down into his mug, looking lost, and Tim remembers Dick confessing one night that he and Jason never really spent any time together, and that he never took the chance to be an older brother for him. So Jason probably has no idea what to do, which means it's up to Tim. He never thought he'd be the most functional one in a room, but Gotham is full of surprises. "Let's watch a movie," he says, breaking the silence, and Jason almost spills his cocoa. "What?" He looks up at Tim with wide eyes. "A movie," Tim repeats. "And do you have more blankets?" Jason stares at him, and for a moment, Tim doesn't think he's going to move. But then he can see Jason visibly pull himself back together. Jason sets the cocoa down and vanishes, returning with several blankets. Tim is sitting on the far end of the sofa and pulled Jason's cocoa over, making it clear that he should join Tim on the sofa. Jason dumps the blankets in the middle of the sofa and grabs a DVD from the shelf. "Emperor's New Groove?" "Yes, please," Tim says. Jason settles on the far end, and if he's pressing himself as far away from Tim as he can get, Tim doesn't mention it. The movie plays, and the tension bleeds out of the room, and Tim sinks deeper into the couch. Jason gets up and puts in another when it's done. The night stretches into dawn, and somewhere along the way, they end up sitting side by side, sharing popcorn. And if they wake up in the morning tangled together, neither one of them will speak of it before they go their separate ways. And that is all for this podfic. All that lovely hurt. This one is definitely a bit more intense. I'm a sucker for these types of really intense, like, starting on the hurt side, but it's all like misunderstanding / acting, and then at the end one party's like, what the fuck have I done? Oh no, but I had to, but what have I done? And the other's just like, wait a second. It's beautiful. I love it. The first half makes me feel physical feelings of dread in my stomach, which is always the goal. And then the second smooths it over with the fluff. And this one just did that. Even just reading it back again for a podfic, I could feel the evil little emotions in my guts just sinking. And it's like, yes! That is exactly what I wanted. It's perfect. I hope you guys have enjoyed this, yes. And that is all for this time. If you guys have enjoyed, make sure to go to the original fic, which you can find in the description. Go there to the original, leave a kudos, leave a comment. I am sure the original author would appreciate it. Anyway, that is all for this time. I will see you guys next time.